Hello, history buffs, time travelers, and scholars. We've gathered 25 strange historical facts that sound fake, but nope, history is just that weird. Stalin's deadly handshake. Joseph Stalin, the Soviet Union's leader, was known for being extremely suspicious of those around him. One of his strange habits was judging people by how they shook hands with him. If someone gripped his hand too tightly, Stalin would think they were trying to show power or dominance over him. He didn't like that at all. If he felt the handshake was too strong, he'd label that person as an enemy of the state. This simple handshake could lead to a terrifying outcome. The person would be arrested, sent to a labor camp, or even executed. Imagine getting into trouble just for shaking hands a little too firmly. The first living creature in space. In 1957, the Soviet Union sent out the world's first satellite, Sputnik, into orbit around the Earth. A month later, they sent out a second satellite, the creatively named Sputnik 2. On board was a dog named Laika. These events are what inspired the United States to found NASA and launch their own first satellite, the Explorer I, in 1958. The Maneaters of Tavo. In 1898, during the construction of a railway bridge over the Tavo River in Kenya, something terrifying happened. Two lions, which were later called the Maneaters of Tavo, began attacking and killing the workers. These lions didn't behave like regular lions. They hunted humans instead of their usual prey, and over a period of about 9 months, they killed at least 130 people. Workers were so scared that many fled the construction site. The lions were finally hunted down and killed by a British colonel named John Henry Patterson. The bodies of these lions were stuffed and are now on display at the Field Museum in Chicago. Their unusual behavior remains a mystery to this day, making the story even more chilling. The rat torture. Back in medieval Europe, torture was a common way to punish or extract confessions from people. One of the most terrifying methods was known as rat torture. The victim would be tied down, and a cage full of live rats would be placed on their stomach or chest. The top of the cage was heated, causing the rats to panic. In their desperation to escape the heat, the rats would start digging into the victim's body, chewing through their skin and organs to get away. This method was used to terrify people into giving up secrets or just as a brutal form of punishment. It was one of the scariest ways a person could be tortured. The spiders as medicine. Back in medieval Europe, people believed that spiders had healing powers. If someone was feeling sick, especially with things like headaches or fevers, they would sometimes crush up a spider and either eat it or put it on the sore area. As strange as it sounds, spiders were thought to be a cure for different health problems. Of course, we now know that spiders aren't good medicine, but back then, people didn't have the medical knowledge we do today. They tried anything they thought might work, even if it was as odd as using spiders. Queen Elizabeth's assassination attempts. Queen Elizabeth I of England had a lot of enemies during her reign. Many people, both from inside her country and from other nations, wanted to see her dead. Over the years, she survived several assassination attempts. One of the most famous plots against her was called the Gunpowder Plot. In this plot, some people planned to blow up the Queen by placing gunpowder under her bedchamber. Luckily, the plot was discovered before it could happen, and Queen Elizabeth lived to rule for many more years. She faced danger many times, but her cleverness and loyal supporters helped keep her safe. The stolen brain. When the famous scientist Albert Einstein died in 1955, something strange happened. His brain was removed by a doctor without asking for permission from his family. The doctor, named Thomas Stoltz Harvey, thought that studying Einstein's brain could reveal what made him so smart. So he took the brain, divided it into pieces, and sent parts of it to different scientists for research. For many years, the brain was moved around in secret and even kept in a jar. Einstein's family was upset about this, but eventually, the brain was returned. Today, parts of it are still preserved, but it's strange to think that such an important piece of history was stolen for so long. The Egyptian divorce. Unlike many ancient civilizations, Egyptian women had some impressive rights. One of the most surprising facts is that they could divorce their husbands. If a woman was unhappy in her marriage, she didn't have to stay. She could leave her husband and even keep her own property, which was very different from what women could do in other ancient cultures. Egyptian women could also own land, run businesses, and work in many jobs. While the world has made lots of progress in women's rights since then, ancient Egypt was ahead of its time in giving women these freedoms. Kissing banned in Rome. In 16 AD, the Roman Emperor Tiberius decided to ban something that seems pretty harmless: kissing. He did this because there was a disease spreading around at the time, and he thought that stopping people from kissing would help stop the disease from spreading. This meant that no one, not even family members or close friends, could greet each other with a kiss. It's like the ancient version of social distancing. The Vikings loved grooming. When you think about the Vikings, you might imagine big, strong men with horned helmets. Funny enough, Viking men actually cared a lot about how they looked. Many of them would dye their hair blonde, as it was viewed as the best color. They would even dye their beards. Not only that, but Vikings had combs, tweezers, and ear spoons to clean out their ears. They even bathed 4 times as much as most other people from their time. Thomas Edison electrocuted an elephant. In 1903, inventor Thomas Edison wanted to prove that his rival Nikola Tesla's alternating current, AC, was dangerous. So what did he do? He electrocuted an elephant named Topsy in front of a crowd. This cruel stunt was part of Edison's attempt to show that Tesla's AC electricity was too risky to use. Poor Topsy became an unfortunate victim of Edison's electric war. Not Edison's proudest moment, but it sure left an electrifying impression on history. A chicken lived without a head for 18 months. In 1945, a farmer named Lloyd Olson tried to butcher a chicken, but he accidentally left part of its brainstem intact. To everyone's surprise, the chicken, named Mike, didn't die. Instead, it kept living for 18 months. Mike even became famous, touring the country as the Headless Wonder Chicken. The farmer fed Mike through an eyedropper. Imagine feeding a headless chicken. What a sight. Eventually, Mike choked on a kernel of corn, ending his bizarre but headless journey. A war was fought over a bucket. Believe it or not, in 1325, the Italian city-states of Modena and Bologna went to war over a wooden bucket. It all started when soldiers from Modena stole a bucket from Bologna. Instead of laughing it off, the Bolognese were furious, and a full-on war erupted, lasting 12 years. Hundreds of people died over this bucket. The bucket is still on display in Modena today, as a reminder of one of the most ridiculous reasons for a war in history. The Library of Alexandria was burned, multiple times. The Library of Alexandria was one of the greatest centers of knowledge in the ancient world. But sadly, it wasn't destroyed in one dramatic event. Instead, it was damaged by multiple fires over centuries, with one famous incident happening during Julius Caesar's siege in 48 BC. Each time, more priceless books and scrolls were lost. Imagine the world knowledge we might still have today if those books hadn't gone up in smoke. It's like losing the internet in a slow, painful process. CocaCola is older than the Eiffel Tower. On 8 May 1886, Dr. John Pemberton sold the first glass of Coca-Cola at Jacob's Pharmacy in Atlanta, charging 5 cents a glass. Nearly 3 years later, on 31 March 1889, construction of the 300-meter-high Eiffel Tower in Paris, France, was completed. Peter the Great taxed beards. Russian Tsar Peter the Great had a thing for modernizing his country, and he thought beards were old-fashioned. So, he taxed anyone with a beard. Men who wanted to keep their facial hair had to pay up and carry a special token to prove they had paid the beard tax. No free facial hair here. Clean-shaven or taxed, those were your choices in Peter's Russia. Shakespeare invented the name Jessica. The name Jessica didn't exist until William Shakespeare invented it for his play The Merchant of Venice. The character, Shylock's daughter, was named Jessica, and the name became popular after that. So, if you know a Jessica, you can thank Shakespeare for coming up with it. Talk about being creative with words. He wasn't just writing plays, he was naming people. A Japanese emperor was only 10 months old. Emperor Antoku of Japan holds the record for being one of the youngest emperors in history. He became emperor when he was just 10 months old in 1180. Of course, he didn't do much ruling himself, with others making decisions for him. Imagine a baby sitting on a throne, royal crown sliding off his tiny head. Definitely not the most practical ruler. Servants were sometimes covered in honey. Pharaohs had a unique way of avoiding pesky flies. They had servants covered in honey stand nearby to attract the flies away from them. Imagine being the designated fly trap in a royal court. It may sound gross, but anything to keep the ruler comfortable, right? The pharaoh stayed cool, while the poor servant got all the attention from the insects. Paul Revere was a dentist. While Paul Revere is famous for his midnight ride to warn about the British coming, he was also a part-time dentist. He made dentures for people, often from ivory or metal. He wasn't just helping fight for freedom. He was fixing people's smiles too. Imagine getting your teeth fixed by the guy who helped spark a revolution. Talk about a revolutionary dentist. Thomas Edison was afraid of the dark. The man who invented the light bulb, Thomas Edison, was reportedly afraid of the dark. He kept lights on in his home and lab all the time. Perhaps his fear of darkness drove him to create the light bulb in the first place. Who knew the guy who brightened the world had his own shadows to conquer? Talk about facing your fears head on. Or should we say, light on. There was a war fought over a missing ear. In 1739, Britain and Spain went to war over one of the strangest causes in history, a severed ear. This conflict is famously called the War of Jenkins' Ear. It all started when Robert Jenkins, a British sea captain, claimed that Spanish sailors attacked his ship and cut off his ear during a dispute over trading rights in the Caribbean. To prove his story, Jenkins showed up in the British Parliament with his severed ear, preserved in a jar as evidence. Parliament, furious over the treatment of a British captain, used the incident to justify starting a war against Spain. The Pirate Queen. One of the most feared, respected, and successful pirates in all of history wasn't your typical swashbuckling buccaneer. In fact, she was a Chinese prostitute turned pirate queen named Qing Shi. Rising from humble beginnings, she married a notorious pirate captain, and after his death, took control of his massive fleet. But she didn't just maintain it, she expanded it into a pirate empire with over 1,500 ships and a staggering 80,000 sailors under her command. Qing Shi's dominance over the South China Sea in the early 19th century made her the terror of the Chinese Navy, as well as foreign merchant ships. Her pirate code was strict, and her leadership was so effective that even imperial forces, European navies, and bounty hunters failed to defeat her. King George III talked to trees. King George III, who ruled Britain during the tumultuous times of the American Revolution, is often remembered for his unusual behaviors attributed to a mental illness. Among the many eccentricities attributed to him, one of the most bizarre was his belief that he could converse with trees, specifically oak trees. In his mind, these towering giants were not just plants, they were his friends, and in some instances, his fellow royalty. During his reign in the late 18th century, George III experienced severe episodes of mental distress, which historians believe were possibly symptoms of porphyria, a condition that affects the nervous system. During these episodes, he would wander through his gardens, talking to the trees as if they could respond. The Nobel Prize. It's surprising to know that some of history's most notorious dictators, Adolf Hitler, Joseph Stalin, and Benito Mussolini, were nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. Hitler was nominated in 1939 by a Swedish politician who mistakenly thought his policies would lead to peace, just months before World War II began. Stalin received a nomination in 1945 for his role in defeating Nazi Germany, despite his brutal regime that caused millions of deaths. Mussolini was nominated in 1935 while he was invading Ethiopia. These nominations show how strange it is that people connected to violence were considered for such a prestigious peace award. Did we skip over any mind-blowing facts? Don't keep them to yourself. Spill the beans in the comment section. And while you're at it, give that like button a little love and hit subscribe for more awesome videos. Let's keep the fun rolling.